Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this virtual meetup slash webinar. And thanks, organizer, for hosting me and to give this talk. So today, the topic is, as you all know, is about Well-Architected framework, and I'm going to talk about what it is, why this is bring into perspective, and how it can help you going forward while operating workloads on cloud. So just put the perspective here before we zoom into the actual topic. Is, as we all know, that building IT systems and is a process, but if you try to put an analogy, it looks like similar to building a physical infrastructure component like building or something. So if we don't put much emphasis on the robustness of the foundation of the building or infrastructure piece, it can give challenges around the integrity and the function of the building, and it can give challenges with that. When you try to relate this to your workloads, so if it's really important to focus on the foundations and the fundamental building blocks to see how you are going to build and operate your workloads on the cloud. So this is a question which is coming from the fundamental thing that are you well architected, or do your workload follow the principles of well architected? So to zoom into these topic is more about some logical areas which have been found while working with customers and doing similar kind of reviews. You can say well architected review in general. So these areas are logical, but they map to pillars, which we'll talk in subsequent slides. So these areas are the areas wherein you need to zoom in and try to find, or you can try to challenge yourself by asking those questions that, are you doing the right things? So it goes again into that the process or the way you are going to do this, that should give you a consistent approach, and that should be able to apply it at any workload which you are going to operate, and it should be pretty flexible. So that's what the fundamental areas and tenets about well architected is. So what AWS well architected is and what's the history and what it is all about. So let's zoom into this now. So since 2012 and so, the field teams, meaning solution architect and professional services and other field roles in AWS, started guiding customers with the principles of well architected and doing such process called well architected reviews back then, wherein AWS field teams were working with customers and helping them review their workloads on AWS. So this is how well architected started. But these things come into perspective from the organizations which is actually building this platform, and in history also the principal engineering community of Amazon.com, they bring in these best practices while operating applications at a scale. They try to codify all these best practices and try to merge it with the field roles from AWS, like solution architect and professional services, and they started guiding customers who are trying to build workloads on and operate workloads on AWS. So that is how all it started in history. It started with 4 pillars, and we started publishing those questions in the documentation. And then in 2015, we published a framework which are not only limited to the questions or the actual review process, wherein it incorporated all the foundational thing about this, the thinking from which it comes. So it puts structure around while zooming into those areas, which we call it pillars. And then in each pillar, we zoom into some design principles, and across these design principles, we come up with best practices areas. And then we zoom into the questions which you can ask yourself and the team to come up with reviewing your architecture based on those principles. So that is how the framework came into perspective, and we started publishing around October 2015. Then we added another pillar in 2016, which is around operational excellence. Then going forward, 2017, we leverage our technology partners and Amazon partner network to scale this mechanism to even more customers. So for example, Oblivion Cloud Control is one of such partner who are enabled to do and help customers around this well-architected. So we wanted to scale this mechanism beyond AWS field team. So this happened. And then based on customer demands, we made it self-service tool, or you can say other way, as a service on AWS platform, which you can access from management console. And it's available across regions in EU, for example, in Frankfurt, Ireland, and London. And since then, it's not like one thing which we delivered. We are constantly innovating, refining questions, putting best practices, updating documentation around. And that is how the team is iterating and bringing up new functionalities around this. So why this is important? So I think I put a perspective in the start, but to make it a more structured organization around as a framework gives us flexibility to guide customers around whether they are about to design a workload, new workload, or whether they want to assess the existing workloads, how well it is aligning to the best practices and cloud native decisions. So this is that way important. But the other thing which gives while using well-architected framework is that gives you informed decisions. It guides you about the business impacts of the choices which you have made or you are about to make in your workloads. And it gives you flexibility to learn AWS best practices all along the way. So that's why it's important, and we try to advise customers to leverage it. So there is nothing is more of the process or the way we advise customers that you start by doing small things and you try to learn from that experience, but you put a mechanism to measure your success and your outcomes, what you are going to do. And based from this, make a baseline and try to improve around this. So how it makes sense into this perspective is, I'll clarify on this going forward. So what's there in AWS Well-Architected framework? As I said, it's not only the questions or best practices, it's a quite organized way of putting these best practices into perspective. So it starts with pillars. So there are some terminology around, for example, pillars, components, workloads, I'll describe that. So pillars talks of 5 pillars, which you are going to see in the next slides. Then for each pillar, we have few design principles. And we have few fundamental design principles, which are, you can say, common design principles, which are not related to or specific to any of the pillars, but those are quite relevant and important. And for every these design principle, we come up with the best practices area. And this is all documented in AWS Well-Architected Framework white paper. And then it zooms into the specific questions around those pillars. So as I said earlier about the terminology, so pillar is just logical concepts around putting these areas to look upon. Then comes the terminology around, we say, component. So component is you can say a minimum ownership or technical ownership of a component. It could be your configuration, it could be a piece of code, or it could be an AWS resource, which helps you to deliver business functionality and which becomes a part of an application on a workload. Then comes the workload. Then again, it's a logical concept which you can understand like a logical grouping of components which interact together and work together to deliver a business function. Then comes we talked about the components, then we talked about the workloads, and we talk about the specific lens So lens is one of the concepts which came in the history, wherein if you see the AWS Well-Architected framework, it takes a pretty generic technical perspective while guiding you across designing your architectures and reviewing these architectures. But if we take specific areas, for example, serverless computing, IoT, or high performance computing, there are specific best practices and perspective required to assess and review those architectures. So based on that, we bring in the concept of lens. This is again logical, but which helps you to dive deep and drill down on these specific type of workloads. So that's the extension of AWS Well-Architected framework, which zooms into and gives perspective guidance around those specific areas. So what are those pillars? So it was initially those logical areas. So it goes with operational excellence, security, reliability, performance efficiency, and the other one is, okay, this is about, sorry. Yeah, this is about optimization. So so operation excellence is about the ability to run and your workloads and measure performance around processes and procedures. Security is about protecting your data, systems, and assets, and try to assess and mitigate your risk around these components. Reliability, again, the ability around your workload to sustain the unavailability of underlying components which are building your application, and also to assess and minimize the impact of such events and to give reliable business functions in such cases of unavailability. Performance efficiency is about ability to adapt to the changing needs of architecture, changing needs of platform, and try to optimize based on what's available and which can help you to further optimize the workloads, whether it's computing needs, whether it's business needs, whether it's changing architecture patterns or evolving business needs. So that's about the adaptability of the workloads. And it's about cost optimization is about to leverage the functionalities which help you to reduce the cost and running the workloads at optimum scale. So usually this is pretty flexible in terms of how you approach this. So for example, what I have seen with working with customers is that out of these 5 pillars, usually operational excellence and security is something which is not traded off with other pillars, but whereas other pillars can be traded off based on your business outcomes. For example, for non-prod workloads, you can pretty much trade off your reliability versus cost optimization, wherein for non-prod workloads, you can optimize cost, trading off reliability of the workloads. And for example, if we talk about production workloads and mission critical applications, wherein you try to increase the reliability or try to optimize the reliability with trading off with higher cost. So that is how it goes. So the framework guides these pillars and design principles and best practices, but it again comes into the perspective of your business needs and business context, how you apply it. So that, as I talked earlier, so it beyond pillars, every pillars has specific design principles, but we have generic design principles which are pretty common and applies irrespective of zooming into all these areas, which are principally guided by how we see towards cloud native architectures and flexibility of cloud. So that is how it goes. So in framework, we talk about generic design principles. So this is all documented as an documentation on the website as a part of white paper. I'll show the links and it will be shared later. So again, these generic design principles, as you see, these are talking about more of agility and flexibility of the platform and how you can leverage it. So it's about the thought process which you should take while you are designing workloads, operating workloads, or you are reviewing your existing architectures, that how you can leverage all these generic framework as a starting point without zooming into specifics of AWS Well-Architected. So as you said, like to name few, for example, stop guessing your capacity needs is again relates to the elasticity of the platform. And if you can leverage and you can build your workloads or operate your workloads operating in a flexible way rather than provisioning capacity upfront and not leveraging the flexibility of the platform services and features, this could be one thing. And that is how it goes again with automation and trying to have a architecture which can be evolved going forward as new things come. You can adapt in your workloads and you can improve while exercising those scenarios, whether it's about testing systems at production scale or trying to test reliability of your system by simulating something called game days, which is just simulation of your behavior of application in terms of catastrophic events, whether it's unavailability or capacity crunch or whatever. You can simulate those scenarios and try to see how effective your procedures are into perspective on the grounds beyond your documentation. I have put two examples around security and reliability, like what those specific design principles around these pillars look like. So if you see about, for example, in security, we talk about these 7 design principles. As I said in earlier, it's a pretty generic perspective to being flexible at the time, but to give enough guidance so that you can think about the areas which you can work upon or we can see while designing your workloads and operating, that how you can make it as per best practices. So it goes again with having a strong identity foundation, enabled traceability, applying security on all layers. It's not about, for example, putting the security at periphery. It's more about ingrained into all layers of your application. Try to automate the best practices in terms of whether it's your infrastructure automation or it's about your automation around control, whether it's detective and preventive control. About protecting data, whether it's about through encryption in transit or at rest. Trying to have robust access mechanisms around data. And you prepare about security events, for example, again, the simulation of game days. Another example around reliability pillar about the design principles. So this is a pretty broad, high-level view around these areas. Then it drills down into the best practices which are coded and which comes from these design principles. And based on this best practices, we guide and we give enough context about that, what is meant with these best practices, how you can leverage these best practices, which services and features are there to help you out to achieve these best practices. And then at the end, it talks about specific questions which you can ask while you are evaluating your architectures or while you are still into the design phase and you're evaluating your design. So give an example how these questions look like or how it comes into perspective beyond these pillars and design principles. So this is an example of a question which comes from reliability pillar. And so this is within a particular pillar, we have a pillar area, like there are components. For example, in reliability, there is a area called failure management. In failure management, we got one question. Okay, how does your system withstand component failure? So this is a question. We provide context, in which context this is relevant. What are the best practices around this? Like what are the best practices around failure management, what can be done and what's possible, and what should be seen as a best practices to adapt and all this. And then it talks of questions that whether you are doing this, whether you are you have enough monitoring in place, whether you are leveraging high availability construct in your applications, whether you have deployed your applications across multiple availability zones or not. So these questions, so this all is being codified and which is available as a self-service tool, which is called AWS Well-Architected tool. This is available as a service. You can access it via Management Console. In this, I'll show you a few screenshots later in which you can set priority about those pillars, because based on the context of your application and business context, these pillars will have different priority. There is a default priority in the tool, but you can change that priority, and based on this, you go about a particular workload. Within this pillars, you zoom into these pillar areas, you go into questions, and you capture your response against those questions. So based on whatever response you give, means what you are currently doing, what it's not there, what's not there, you capture this thing, and based on this tool gives you guidance at the end that how much needs to be done in terms of improving and going from there as a part of this review. There are some questions which may or may not be relevant based on the scope of your workload, context of your workloads, and then you can mark, for example, not applicable. So those are not considered into giving recommendation at the end. But as I said, it's pretty flexible. It's just more of guiding you towards achieving the better workloads and better outcomes. So that's how you can adapt based on your needs. So how you apply AWS Well-Architected? So few things to emphasize on this. This is a constructive conversation about your team members and the people who are operating those applications and the people related with this, for example, security and the business owners. But it's about making and working together to improve from there. This is not an audit, it's just a conversation and review process. And it's programmatic and it's a proven advice. It's not about giving you high-level view. It goes into pretty much details, asking you relevant questions, and as enough information and as transparent you have been into your process, as effective it can be for you. And this is not a one-time. You can start in pretty early in your design process, within your design process, or even if you are about to deploy your workload in production, you can apply it anytime. And you can keep on iterating on this based on what you find as a recommendation. You prioritize based on your criteria, like when you are going to remediate and work upon those recommendations as part of your backlog. And you keep on updating the tool, your findings, and the way you achieve the next stages in your review process, and the way process goes on. So there are a few items here. Is like if you want to start about this. So the first recommendation is to start with reading the white papers. Like there is a one top level framework white paper which talks about the whole process in detail, and then there are pillar specific white papers at AWS Well-Architected website, and then you iterate through this life cycle. And you can apply it at any milestone, whether it's your halfway close or your just launch. How you do it? So it's, as I said, it's available self-service as a in Management Console is a well-architected tool. You can leverage partners, for example, Oblivion, and other partners who are entitled to conduct AWS Well-Architected review and work upon recommendation and guide you with the remediation of the findings around Well-Architected. Or if you have engaging with your AWS account team, you can engage with your account team to further work upon the remediation and recommendation, or even to know more about this process. So that's these are the different choices which you can go about based on your scenario. So it's just a text about that. It's self-service. You have full control how and when you want to do it. You can leverage partners when you have crunch on the skills, or you are just going it first time, or you are not pretty much into how to go about it and how to get the best effect and best outcome out of this. Then advice is to you can leverage partners as well. And if you have got engagement with your AWS account team, you can work with your account team, in particularly solution architect, to work along with your teams to guide you further with this. So it's about what the benefit you get from out of AWS Well-Architected is, okay, it's about learning best practices for the cloud. You can apply it as a part of your technology governance or technology portfolio management, wherein you can apply this as a consistent approach across the workloads, because it doesn't go into specifics of the technology choices you make, but it gives you enough guidance to review your architecture in a consistent way across your technology portfolio. So the URL here is talks about the whole framework, which talks the framework at a you can say overarching level, wherein it talks of all the pillars in one white paper. That's called AWS Well-Architected Framework. Then there are links to specific white papers which goes all those 5 pillars, and you can read about this to get an idea what's the approach and methodology being used here. And that is how it's reflected into the well-architected tool. So all pillars, as I said, has specific details. This goes into a specific white paper. So those are also linked there on the specific the AWS Well-Architected website. Then I talked about lens. So to zoom into bit and the drill down about a specific technology perspective, then we have lens around serverless, high performance computing, that is HPC, and IoT workloads. In every lens has a dedicated white paper which talks about reference architectures and specifics about those workloads characteristics, and talks about best practices around that. There is a self-paced training which talks about well-architected. So the training.aws is the portal for self-paced learning from AWS. There are a lot of free learnings available, including on well-architected. You can browse the catalog to see these trainings. If you register, you get access to these free self-paced trainings, and you can go about this to learn more about what's there in white paper and what's there in the approach and how you go about that. This is the screenshot from the well-architected tool, which you see in the management console, which talks about, like, you can configure the priority of the pillars, you can consolidate all this review, you can make remediation plans and recommendation, and you can capture all those inputs here in the well-architected tool. And if you want to learn about like how AWS Well-Architected came into perspective, so even before all these web links were made, there was a portal which was always there and is still available, that is called Well-Architected Content website, that is w.aws.amazon.com. This talks about like the introduction, definition, the map which you see in the middle picture, which talks about these 5 pillars, we zoom into the areas, and in that area we go into specific perspective about within that pillar. So, and that gives you definitions around those terminologies which is being used in this whole well-architected framework, and it gives you pretty much deep documentation around this, and you can read about this if you would like to. So the other aspect which customers are asking about for quite long is that we want to see how to apply the recommendations part of this. We are good. We are fine with reviewing the architectures. We get recommendation, and how to go about this. So how to implement into reality around workloads. So we built something called Well-Architected Labs. So there is a link here, and if you can search on the internet, you will find this pretty easily. It talks about collection of code and infrastructure components and automation scripts, which you guide about to go about, for example, these pillars, pick few findings and try to go hands-on about that, how to work around and how to go about remediation about those things. So it goes into pretty much detail about, it takes a simulation of a scenario, what the scenario is, what we are trying to achieve here, and then it gives guidance with this either infrastructure as code, for example, cloud permission template, or it gives you specific configurations to tweak in to achieve those recommendations. So that is recently published in July last year, which is even before it's called Well-Architected Labs, which gives you the hands-on around how to remediate and go about the recommendations. So it's again, the summary here is about read the white paper before you start, you iterate through questions, and you review based on your journey with your workloads, and you iterate based on what you achieve in the first go, and then based on your priorities, how you evolve and how you go about remediation, and then you keep on iterating and getting value out of it. So this is getting started is more about go to the portal where AWS Well-Architected, read online resources, engage with partners or your account team, leverage all the self-help and self-learning components available, whether it's white paper, well-architected labs, well-architected tool within management consoles, and tool has the specific documentation how to use well-architected tool. It's already documented in the user guide, and there are pre-recorded webinars and on AWS online webinar portal, and you will find YouTube videos about the recordings of tech conference reInvent, wherein people have talked about this well-architected, going about it, what's there in this, and also the introduction about well-architected tool when it was launched. And go about your reviewing your first workload. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajeet. I think it's a good moment to collect some questions. So if you have a question, please send in via the chat or via the Q&A button. Well, one of the questions was if we're going to share the slides. I guess we all do. We'll post the links in the channel of the Meetup, originally on the AWS User Group Meetup. We will find some other ways to assure that the slides will find a way to you. If you cannot find the slides within a couple of days, you can always reach out to me personally. Received question: how often do you recommend to do a review?
Yeah. So, for example, it goes about how you want to go about, how a team wants to go about that well-architected. For example, if you have a cycle or a sprint of, for example, to delivering a workload in a couple of weeks, so maybe I would advise, if you're still working on the design, you go through about first validation about your final design. When you are you are about to approve your final design, you go about this, and I would advise it to do it once before, to check before you go in production. That will be a good moment to do it. It's I would say that is the like the best possible way to do this, but I would encourage, if you still feel need of doing a one mid review where you are still into your development and you are a few weeks before your production, you can go about it. But I would advise to once in the start and at least, and once before moving to production. And if you are reviewing existing workload which are running in production, you can go about it whenever you feel relevant, as soon as possible, and the other way. and then you make a plan about the recommendation which you get, and it try to validate it internally with respect to your business priorities, your business outcomes, and try to prioritize in your backlog along with your regular backlog around application, wherein you put that, okay, we would like to achieve like most critical recommendations wherein there is something related with operational readiness or operational excellence, or there is something related to security. These are the two most important aspects, I would say, and that should be focused upon pretty early, as soon as possible. And then you prioritize on this, and rest you know, but you can put it in later in the backlog. That's how you go about it.
Okay, thank you.